Every man's dream was fulfilled by Dean Martin. Momentum, wealth, and awe from a global audience. For all the world, he embodied the epitome of cool, the silky voice that gave birth to classic songs and the carefree charisma that defined the golden age of Hollywood. However, concealed behind that carefree grin and the glass, a life crumbled in silence as he held the whiskey he always did on stage. Actually, Dean Martin spent his last years as a shell of his former self, shattered by loss, plagued by recollections, and subtly protected by the lady who had loved him more than anyone else. After divorcing him, after 24 years of marriage, Jean Martin continued to. She remained concerned throughout. Jean saw what Dean had lost as a result of his fame, even though everyone else saw him as untouchable. The pain of abandonment, the anguish of loss, and the isolation from which no one could provide solace. Glamour was at the beginning of their story, and unbearable sorrow was at the end. An epic tale of betrayal, devotion, and romance that not even Hollywood could pen. Here we find a heartbreaking conclusion to Dean Martin's story, as told by the woman who witnessed his rise to fame and subsequent slow death from Steubenville. Neither a mansion nor a movie set were the starting points of Dean Martin's story. Steubenville, Ohio's rough and gray streets, were the starting point. The Ohio River's banks sit astride a steel town. On June 7, 1917, he entered this world as Dino Paul Crocetti. His parents came to the United States from Italy in search of a better life, and he was born into that pursuit. In 1913, his father, Gaetano Crocetti, came from Abruzzo, Italy, and established a modest barbershop, and his mother, Angela, was an Italian-American singer from the first generation. Despite their limited resources and infrequent use of the English language, their home was a constant source of joy and Italian folk music. Dino had no idea what he was doing when he finally enrolled in school. The teacher said, bullies picked on him because of his thick accent. They picked on his clumsy English and relentlessly called him names. He made a joke later on about how intelligent he was. But the reality was that he was driven out by a profound sense of isolation. His belief that life's true lessons could be found elsewhere led him to completely discontinue his education by the 10th grade. I learned those lessons quickly and painfully. From steel mill labor to gas station attendant to milkman to bootleg liquor runner. He worked every job he could find. Over the course of Prohibition, as a welterweight, he fought 12 times and won once under the moniker Kid Crochet. I won all but 11, he would say with a grin later on, hiding his true feelings behind his humor. Because of the fights, he now has a crooked nose, a split lip, and scars. Physical objects. Years later, when Dean had already achieved fame, comedian Lou Costello had his nose fixed, a subtle move that contributed to his dapper persona. Dino and his friend and fellow performer Sonny King shared a small New York apartment during that time. They had no money, however creative. They charged $5 to attend their $5 bare-knuckle fights in a living room when their funds ran out. At their best, they could make $50, which is just enough to pay the rent. They would pose as customers in order to steal bites from unattended tables when things were going south. Plates. While times were tough, Dean's charisma shone through. He would serenade gamblers with his soft singing while working as a croupier in an underground casino hidden behind a cigarette shop. Ernie McKay, the band leader, overheard him sing one night and offered him a singing job. After Dean said yes, everything changed for him. After taking a cue from the Italian tenor Nino Martini, he started touring Pennsylvania and Ohio under the name Dino Martini. He had joined the band by 1940 when he received advice from Sammy Watkins, the band leader, that would last a lifetime. You possess the expression, youngster. Drop the I, though, if you're serious about making it, Dean Martin it is. Everything changed because of that one little tweak. The sound of the name was soothing, American, and memorable, and Dean Martin's legendary status started to materialize at that very moment. However, he was oblivious to the future glory and misery that would be associated with that name. A tale of love, marriage, and treachery. Things were looking up for Dean Martin by the early 1940s. He was charismatic, talented, and had the voice to ambition. However, stability was still something he lacked. That happened in 1941 when he met an innocent young Ohioan named Elizabeth and Betty McDonald, who fell head over heels for him despite his lack of star power. Dean Martin wasn't even born when they tied the knot that year, became a well-known figure. They weathered his career's early storms side by side, nights consumed by unpaid gigs, tiny club performances, and the constant doubt that his dream would ever come true. His anchor became Betty. Dean performed his music in seedy nightclubs and lounges, while she remained at home to raise their expanding family. Craig, Claudia, Gail, and Dina were their 4 children, born in 1941, 1944, 1945, and 1948, respectively. Audiences adored Dean whenever he performed because of his gentle voice and easy smile. Behind the scenes, though, he was a mere youth, a father attempting to meet financial obligations. Though charming, he was fidgety. A marriage could not easily resist the temptations that came with fame, which was starting to beckon. Discord in the marriage started to emerge as his career excelled. Betty faced significant challenges. Alcoholism, frequently vanishing for days or weeks on end. Stunning women, dazzling lights, and an endless stream of parties encircled Dean. He was submissive. In Hollywood circles, the affairs were whispered but seldom printed. Gossip was kept at bay by Dean's public persona as the suave bachelor who was always up for a drink and a joke. However, harm had already been done at home. The union had crumbled by 1949. Dean was granted custody of all 4 children after he filed for a divorce. Quite a bold move for that time. Betty slipped away to San Francisco, avoiding the limelight that was about to engulf her ex-husband. Decades after Dean had moved on, she passed away in 1989 while maintaining a low profile, never fully escaping the shadow of her infamous boyfriend, the one he goes by. Dean remarried Jean Beggar, a model and ex-Orange Bowl queen, only 7 days after finalizing his divorce. Jerry Lewis, his business partner, was the best man at their lavish September 1st, 1949, Hollywood wedding. Grace and loyalty were exemplified by Jean. It appeared for a time that Dean had at last achieved equilibrium. She was by his side during all of his major achievements, including his comedic films with Jerry, his solo career, and his acceptance into the Rat Pack. They wed in 1951 and had 3 children, Rachie in 1953, Gina in 1956, and Dean Paul the following year. All 7 of Dean's children, Jean's and Betty's, were brought up in the same household. Everyone thought they were the epitome of a typical American family, beautiful, close-knit, and content. However, notoriety is never a solid basis. His absences became longer as Dean's career took off, and his nights that were more untamed, and his betrayals that hurt more. Jane had forgiven him countless times, but by the late 1960s, not even she could muster any more tolerance. Their 1973 divorce came after 24 years of marriage. Everyone in Dean's inner circle knew that Jean had an affair, but he would remarry anyhow. He would never get over losing the woman who had been his soulmate. Famous people's salaries in the Rat Pack era. By ending his decade-long collaboration with Jerry Lewis in 1956, Dean Martin was widely believed to have signed his own career suicide warrant. His detractors dubbed him the straight man who, without Lewis, would perish, though Dean disproved their claims. He went from being a sidekick to one of America's most electrifying performers in just 2 years, joining forces with Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and others in Las Vegas marked the beginning of his resurrection. Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, and others. They were a gang of slick-talking, hard-living performers who made the Strip their playground. They were called the Rat Pack. Their chemistry, banter, and natural charisma wowed audiences night after night, and the Sands Hotel began to sell out their performances. They embodied confidence and style, according to their admirers. Dean appeared the most untamed on stage, holding a whiskey glass and a cigarette, respectively. He has a slightly off-kilter smile and an errant tie. However, that image was largely an illusion. Instead of liquor, his drink of choice was apple juice. Dean fooled everyone with his act, which included slurred words and lazy jokes. Even Sinatra admitted as much. Out of everyone, only he was sober. The act catapulted him to fame, but it also isolated him from his myth. The public no longer recognized Dean for who he really was. At all times, he exuded an air of effortless self-assurance. In other words, he was the embodiment of cool. With the curtain drawn, Dean remained silent, reserved, and occasionally incredibly lonely. Not like Sinatra, he seldom hung out at after-parties or gambled all night long. He would often return home after the show ended, watch TV, and then go to sleep by himself. But you couldn't deny his magnetic presence. Rio Bravo and The Young Lions, two of his films, rendered all critics speechless. No one had ever cast doubt on him. Nobody saw the breadth, depth, and vulnerability in him. Hollywood attempted to categorize him as a comic singer or a lounge act, but Dean shattered those molds. After that, in 1965, there was the Dean Martin Show. NBC was hoping to record his charisma on television, yet Dean dared to make demands that no other celebrity would dream of. 1 day of filming per week, complete control of the show following its initial airing, and no rehearsals. Unexpectedly, NBC concurred. It was an enormous success. A television empire founded solely on Dean's charisma, with 264 episodes and more than 40 million weekly viewers. He appeared unprepared every time he stepped onto that stage. The key was in that detail. He was the one. Relaxed, unconcerned, unreachable. Despite this, he felt increasingly lonely as his fame grew. The glitzy pals, the applause, and the laughter were all genuine. Just a moment. Dean used to say, "If you have luck, you don't have to be smart, but luck fades." And in the past, Dean's outlook and emotion started to deteriorate in the 1970s. The day everything came crashing down. Everything for Dean Martin came to a halt on March 21st, 1987. A beautiful actor, musician, and son of Air National Guard pilot Dean Paul Martin crashed his F-4C Phantom jet into a California hillside, killing him and his family. Peak in the midst of a winter snowfall. His young age was 35. Dean Paul had brought immense joy to his father's life. He was known as the Golden Boy by Dean. Unspokenly, they had formed a bond. Dean had experienced the end of a marriage. Notoriety, controversy, and the shock of losing his son all failed to adequately prepare him. 6 days were spent searching for the debris. After it ended, Dean stepped back entirely. His friends and acquaintances said he changed drastically. He lost interest, ceased performing, and ceased to smile. His son's death, according to his longtime friend Rich Little, was a final straw. Dean, Sinatra, and Sammy Davis Jr. were all getting ready for their ultimate event tour when a crash happened. The Rat Pack was set to reunite in a victorious fashion, but following Dean, he was unable to continue after Paul's death. He arrived for the initial performances visibly distant, silent, and distraught, but he abruptly left the tour in the middle. Dean was unmoved by Sinatra's attempts to shove him back. He was suddenly joined by his ex-wife, Jean, even though they'd been separated for more than 12. For 10 years, no one else could get in touch with him. As he ate alone night after night, she remained close by, making sure he was okay. She stayed out of it. Quietly and faithfully, she observed him as he dwindled away. The tragic year that Dean Martin passed away was the last straw. The world beheld the endearing celebrity who formerly sang the song, "Everybody Loves Somebody." Those closest to him, however, witnessed a man engulfed in sorrow. His now famous statement, "I'm just waiting to die," was actually, "Joke. I must confess," she said. Finally, farewell as the light gradually dims. Dean Martin's public profile dwindled after 1987. He seldom gave performances, seldom interacted with others, and often spent his nights lounging alone in Beverly Hills. Eateries, the exact spot where Jean would also leisurely sit in the vicinity. Even when words were unnecessary, she seemed unable to tear her eyes away from him. His health started to deteriorate in 1993. The years of smoking finally got to him. He was advised to have surgery after being diagnosed with lung cancer. He was turned down. He assured his friends that he had indeed had a good life. The weariness of a man who had endured too much loss was conveyed in that one sentence. In his last months, he lived in relative quiet, surrounded by mementos of his son and watching reruns of his favorite TV shows. The once laughing history man now waited for the end in the shadows. Dean Martin passed away at the age of 78 on December 25, 1995, due to acute respiratory failure brought on by emphysema. He shocked Hollywood with his death. The real Frank. Abrogate, not by blood but by choice. Sinatra proclaimed him a brother in his grief. Las Vegas paid homage 3 days afterward. The lights on the Strip were dimmed for 10 minutes, a rare gesture that is reserved for legends. In hushed stillness, the flamingos, stardust, and sands turned black. As he shone, the city he had a hand in shaping came to a standstill. Los Angeles' Westwood Village Memorial Park is where Dean was laid to rest. An unassuming inscription, a line from his most famous song, "Everybody loves somebody sometime," adorns his tomb vault. Jan did not remarry. She kept to herself for a long time after he passed away, spending her time with pictures of her kids and Dean. Near his grave, she was laid to rest in 2016 after a courageous battle with cancer. She was 89 years old. Just a few weeks prior to her passing, their son Richie passed away. Richie had committed his life to continuing his father's music legacy. A beautiful, humorous, and unforgettable musical gift was bestowed upon the world by the Martan family. However, an eternity of anguish lay concealed that genius. Silence and the unwavering devotion of a woman who loved him no matter what surrounded Dean Martin in his last years, rather than fame and applause. Since the day they lost their son, Jean has been helpless to halt his gradual deterioration as she watched him deteriorate. A love story that started out brightly but ended in darkness was finally concluded when she followed him. Their names may be immortalized in Hollywood annals, but the story they lived through is one of loss, devotion, and anguish, the kind that not even the most famous actors can erase. In your opinion, did Dean Martin ever achieve true contentment in his life? Or was he consumed by grief over his losses in his final days? Leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit that like button and subscribe button for more forgotten tales from the golden age of Hollywood.